Hey everyone, welcome back to my Devlog series where we bring ideas to life one step at a time. In my last couple of videos, we fleshed out the system design of a shopping list app before we jumped into coding it using Flutter. Now we're shifting gears to start the work on a recipe app. In this video in particular, we're going to talk through the high-level system requirements as well as break down the system design that we have chosen. In addition, we'll have a quick conversation about scaling, which is crucial as the app grows from a small number of users to thousands, if not even millions. At the end, I'm going to wrap things up by giving you a sneak peek at the chosen UI that we will be building next week. So let's dive in. Just like last time, I've pulled up Excalibur here right on my computer, and I will be fleshing out the system requirements first, and then we'll dive right into design. So let's get into it. Now that we have created the functional requirements, let's go over those. So what's core to our application is that users can create a recipe so that they can enter into our systems, that we have them, and other users can find it, of course. That also means that users might want to save recipes that they're interested in preparing in the future, so they have easy access to those saved recipes, which also leads us down to a maybe feature, which is that users might want to be able to access those saved recipes offline so they don't have to always be connected to the internet. In addition, what's also core to our application is that users can search for recipes by name or by cuisine. And then lastly, users also might want to upload images of the prepared meal to give others an idea of what it will look like. And then finally, the last maybe feature here that we haven't talked about yet is that users might want to be able to upload a recipe using their camera. It would be very nice if I could just take a picture of a recipe, upload it, have it extracted, and enter it into our system, though it might be a little bit more complex to get that implemented. Out of scope, of course, is the user account and management and creation. Again, here we could use something from Firebase, who will handle the authentication part and account creation part for us easily. Similarly, I have listed out of scope that users are able to search recipes by ingredients. Now, you might wonder, why did I do this? Well, while it is possible, it becomes a little bit challenging to search by ingredients because now we have to define the ingredients like kind of level of importance. You know, if we search for something like egg, does that mean it has to be the core component of the meal in order to pop up, or does it include anything that would include an egg within the meal? So that is something I didn't want to worry and handle with this implementation, though it is possible just to also do it by ingredient. Similarly, out of scope would be users taking pictures of the meal to find a recipe. That involves a little bit understanding and more AI built into the application, which is not core of an MVP app. Finding restaurants nearby that prepare the meal that the user is looking at might also become a little bit challenging because that requires additional plugins and understanding of the recipe being created. So we're not going to focus this as the get-go. And then finally, I also will exclude users being able to send the ingredients to a shopping list. While it will be nice, it is not the core functionality of the application. So now that we stepped through the functional requirements, let me create the system design and I'll be right back. Now that I have created a simple system design for our recipe application, let's step over it. So first of all, of course, we have the user who is being connected through a load balancer and then directed to our applications. The three main applications are going to be the recipe extraction service, which again, this is more so for the maybe functionality of users being able to upload a recipe by taking a picture and then kind of extracting it and putting it into our system. The recipe service itself is core to our application. It will handle saving our recipes as well as getting it from the database. However, there's another component I just broke out, which was the search piece, because there's so much complexity that can go into search itself that I believe it requires its own service. We want to be able to search by name, by cuisine, so there are different search functionality, and especially if we eventually want to extend this to maybe say search by ingredients, I believe it makes sense to break this out already early on. With that being said, of course, we're going to have two items that we'll have to store, which are our images of prepared recipes so that users know what it will look like. This could be multiple for a single recipe even. And then, of course, the recipe itself. That includes the name, maybe who created it, and then a list to our prepared images. That means we would probably just store the access URL or something close to it rather than storing every single image within this database, which is why we broke it out. And then we want to store the ingredients list, of course, and finally we want to store how to prepare the recipe itself within our database. So giving those fields and requirements out here, I kind of flushed it out using a non-relational database. I think a recipe probably fits nicely together. Yes, you could do it using relational, but then you kind of get into like, well, a recipe can have any number of ingredients, so it doesn't make sense to have fields. That means I have to have an ingredients table and a recipe table and then a joiner table to create those. Similarly, with the instructions, I can have any amount of instructions, so I have to relate those pieces again. And when it comes to pulling it out of the database, it's a very read-heavy system, our recipe service. It's not really write-focused. So because of that in mind, I think it makes sense to use a relational database. So I can go in and I say, hey, I want this recipe, just grab me everything that's related without having to worry and joining a bunch of rows and columns together in order to get the recipe. So that's why I think relational makes much more sense in this case, which also means, now that we can talk about scaling this a little bit, how would I scale the service? Well, first of all, RecipeDB wouldn't be a single database. I think what we could do is have a write instance and then everything gets written to it. That means maybe we split this, recipe service out itself, have a queue to like a writer, function. And then that is responsible for putting everything into our written DB. And then of course we're going to have a bunch of read replicas because, like I said, we're probably going to have a read heavy system here with a bunch of users who want to look at recipes, but only a handful will actually enter recipes. So with that in mind, it's like we could probably agree that eventual consistency would be feasible within this case, and meaning that eventually users will have access to all the recipes. However, they might not need the very latest recipe the second it comes online. So with that in mind, of course, I think having a bunch of read replicas and one write database to ensure there's no collision on writing makes a whole lot of sense. Now that we talked about this, another thing we might want to think about is caching the most popular recipes. And that varies a lot by region, because what might be popular in the US, like maybe steaks or burgers or I don't know, chicken or something like that, might not be what's going to be very popular in, let's say, Mexico, for instance. Maybe they focus more on tacos or quesadillas or something like that. And things look, again, very different if you go to, Germany. You might see more of schnitzel or bratwurst or something like that. Or if you go to Asia, again, the cuisine looks differently, mostly by country. So it doesn't make sense to just have one cache. Rather, we want to store content local to the user and cache what's important to them. So with that being said, what I would do is probably have a CDN out here, which will actually store, the most popular cuisines from a country. And that could be tracked maybe by a counter or understanding how often something gets accessed. You could even argue, time of day makes a difference. What you eat in the morning is different than what you eat in the evening. But I don't know if we necessarily want to go that much into granularity, but it's important to consideration and call out early on, especially as we want to grow the app. And once we grow it further, maybe we'll notice like, hey, yeah, we actually have a bunch of users that also come in the morning, and they also come at lunchtime, and they also come in the evening, and all the recipes vary. But, so we can cache it if that's the case. But maybe, it's fair to assume at the moment that most users will probably come more towards the evening time or when they have special events. So not necessarily like morning recipes, and that would need to be cached. And then in order, how do we get those in there? That could be part of our recipe service that is actually going to put this into it. So if we go ahead and drag this out a little bit, we could probably say like, hey, once we pulled back X amount of recipes and we know it gets very popular, let's put it into CDN and cache it there. All right, so that wraps up the system design component. So let's take a quick look at the UI that we'll be building next week. Let me pull that over real quick here. All right, so this is the design that I had looked at that we're trying to build out next week. I know this isn't necessarily like a recipe application, but it gives a good representation of what we're going to build. First, here we have like the home page, sort of. Here at the top, users can see featured meals, for instance, as well as popular items at the bottom. And then that could be like a scrolling list to the left or to the right. And then similarly, if we click on this top item, we can see that that opens up basically that meal and that recipe. At the top again, we would show the users photos that they uploaded to our S3 bucket or somewhere, at least where we're storing the images. And then of course we see the name. Up here we could have maybe a list of ingredients that we could expand. And then at the bottom we would just have the recipe itself and how to prepare it. The right I would not worry about here because again, this isn't really part of the application, though it might give you a rough idea of what this could look like when it's scrollable. And that wraps up the system design of our recipe app. We have laid out the system requirements, understand the system design, and talk through scaling, especially as the app grows from a small number of users to thousands and potentially millions. And so if you want to see how the UI comes to life, stay tuned for next week where we will be creating this application using Flutter. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.